J. Bob, thank you for having me come over. I was asked to speak, but not given really any directions about what to say. So when I was doing the evening caretaker, I asked Hafiz to help me figure out the theme, and he did. So let me give you a little context. How many people were raised in the South? Bob, you were in?
Oh, yes.
Dixie? Okay, Dee?
Virginia.
Okay.
We're totally Yankees then.
So, I don't know if this is true throughout the country, but in the South, when you were a young kid and when a grandparent say wanted a kiss, it'd say, "Give me some sugar, honey." Do you remember that?
Yes.
Give me some sugar, honey. Did you all have that outside of the South? Would anyone? A grandparent? Okay. Give me some sugar, honey.
Yeah, give me a kiss.
Give me a, which meant give me a kiss. Exactly.
Yankees don't kiss.
Is that what it is? Okay. Well, now you had to,
do
you
too.
grew up with give me
Is it
sugar.
pecan or pecan? I say pecan. And then so my son, who's really not, he's a southerner, but we get arguments over is pecan or pecan.
A
Or
pecan's what you
aunt
put
or
on,
aunt. I say Aunt Dolly, and he
Yeah.
says Aunt Dolly.
but a pecan's what you put under the bed.
That's right.
Look what you started.
Okay. So
We have these
with-
same conversations in the North, by the way. Just want you to know.
So now that you understand that
Sure.
that sugar is in the South a kiss from your grandmother or someone like that. This is from Hafiz, and this isn't Daniel's translation. This is a book that's in the caretaker's cabin. And this ode was "You Little Turk of Shiraz Town." I thought that was a very sweet title. And this is just a line from it. With sugar talk and sugar walk and all your little sugar ways. So this is what Hafiz said to me to help me with my talk tonight. And what are Baba's sugar ways with us? These are our little, what I would call our little miracles, these ways that Baba lets us know that he is with us. But he lets us know not with the clouds parting or the sea parting, but just in something that only we would know that he is with us. And so I just wanted to go over a few of these little stories in my life that helped me realize over and over again that Baba's always with us. So I heard about Baba in 1969, and I heard about Baba from Charles Haynes, and during the summer he said, look, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wants to do an article on the center, and we're driving up to the center. We were living in Atlanta at that time. I'm from Marietta, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. And he said, there's an extra seat in the car. Do you want to come? And now I'd heard about Baba. I've heard about the center. And this is my first opportunity. And so I said, sure, I want to go. So I drive up with Charles and this reporter from the Atlanta Constitution and the photographer. And so we get there, and it's just a wonderful weekend. I got to meet Elizabeth and Jane and hear their stories about how they came to Baba. And it was that same weekend that the first men landed on the moon, so I got to watch that with Jane and Elizabeth and Nisi and Sheila. It was just a wonderful time. And so then Sunday rolls around. That was a Saturday. On Sunday, we have to leave to come back to Atlanta. And so the photographer wanted some beach shots. So we got up at sunrise to go to the beach, and so he could do those kinds of shots for the article that they were going to do. And he said to me, well, why don't you just walk down the beach and I'll just take a couple of photos of you as a memento, just to let, something you can keep to remember this first time you came to Myrtle Beach. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. So I'm walking down. He takes some shots. He takes some shots of Charles and Louise, and that's it. I mean, he had to go back to the studio, to his studio or lab to actually make the photographs. And so I was 17 years old at the time. So I promptly forgot about it. I mean, he took photographs, but to a 17-year-old, that doesn't mean anything. So several weeks later, I'm living at home with my mother. It's a Sunday morning, and she comes in to my bedroom, and she wakes me up, and she says, "Do you have something to tell me?" And I go, "What? No, let me go back to sleep." And she said, "No, do you have something to tell me?" And I go, "No, what are you talking about?" And she says, "Well, maybe you want to look at this." And so she brings out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, this Sunday supplement, which is, you know, in any major city, you have the Sunday paper and they have that magazine in the middle. And, you know, it has interesting stories in it. Well, she brings it, she shows it to me, and she opens it to the centerfold. And there's this picture of this, you know, boy walking on the beach at sunrise.
You're all taking.
Yeah, if you would show it. And she says, "You might want to tell me about this." And what it says is John Leiter from Marietta, Georgia, walking at the Mayor Center, you know. And the article began by saying John Leiter, a young Bible lover from Marietta, Georgia. And so, you know, this is how my mother found out about Mayor Baba, when it was published to the world. And what was even more embarrassing about it, it was Baba telling me, you know, I was so slow in the uptake, Baba had to tell me that I was a Baba lover. And because it was in the newspaper, it had to be true.
She didn't know you went to Myrtle Beach.
She might have known I went to Myrtle Beach, but I was a 17-year-old just learning about Baba. That's not the first thing you bring up with your mother. Usually, now being a parent, I know that the parents are the last to know anything from their children. And I was no different with my mother. And but she got even with me, and I'll tell that story as well. But so that was my beginning. The newspaper had to tell me I was a Baba lover, and I accepted it. And then Baba kept giving me hints that maybe it was true. And so now I'm at Emory, I'm in college, and I remember one morning I was walking on the campus, and I was in a really foul mood. I just remember being in a really bad mood that morning. Either I didn't sleep, I hadn't gone to class, I hadn't done my assignment, I don't know what it was, but I just remember even to this day how bad I felt. And this guy I knew, he was an upperclassman, came up, and he started yelling at me. I mean, literally, in a high, he was yelling. He said, "You Baba lovers, what is it about you all? You're always smiling." And so I was just in the worst mood. But somehow he saw me smiling, and that was his connection. That it was a thing that Baba lovers did. They're always smiling. And that was Baba's hint again, that he was there even with me on campus. Now Mary and I have another history with the Sunday supplement, not in Atlanta this time, but in England. I think it was our first trip to India together. We're now married. And we're in the airport in Heathrow. And, we're now on the plane to Bombay. And in the old days, the airlines would actually pass out newspapers. Can you imagine that they would do something like that? And so we got whatever, the London Times, the big paper, and so we had it in our lap. And remember, we're on our way to India. And Mary opens that supplement again to the centerfold, and this time it wasn't about me. The headline was Mary Leiter, Jewel of the East. This is true. And it was in the London Times on our way to India. And what we discovered is that there was a Mary Leiter before this Mary Leiter. And she was, if any of you are from Chicago, she was the daughter of the founder of Marshall Field's, which is a large department store. And she married Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India. And she was so loved by the Indians that she was called the Jewel of the East. They loved her more than they loved Lord Curzon. And so this was Baba's little sugar to us on our way to India. So now, before that, when I was in India, I was staying with Vilu at Vilu's, as we did in the old days, or some of us did, those of us who were scared to actually venture out into the other places. And the first time I went, I was there with Charles Haynes, and oh, now I forgot his name, but he was in the army at the time, and he came from Germany. He used to live in Myrtle Beach. Well, Charles got called back to the States because he had to report for a physical, for the draft. This was still 1971, and the war in Vietnam was going on. And I just decided to stay back, and so I went with Charles to Bombay to put him on the plane. And I was coming back, and Vigalu had said, look, when you're coming back, rather than coming into Pune and trying to catch a cab, get off at the city called Shivaji Nagar. I don't know if any of you have ever stopped there. It's apparently the biggest taxi cab stand in the universe. I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what to do, but she just said, get off and you'll find a taxi to Ahmednagar. It'll be easier to get it there. Well, I get off the train, and it was like there was just a sea of humanity. And they're all going around looking for a taxi or a bus to get somewhere. And I had no idea how to even begin to think about getting a taxi to Ahmednagar. And I'm just sort of looking around and standing there, and suddenly in front of me is Vilu's driver. She had her own driver in Ahmednagar. And he pulls me over, and there's Vilu sitting in the car. I mean, she had no idea that when I was coming back. I said, Vilu, were you here to pick me up? And she said, no, of course not. I was here just to grab someone who wanted a car ride back to Ahmednagar. She was going to charge someone a fare. And this is her way of finding someone. And suddenly, out of thousands of people, I'm standing there. So again, this is Baba's little miracle for me. That totally unexpected, but it worked out perfectly. So we've all had these kinds of stories. I mean, this isn't just for me, but we've all had these little drops of sugar, little miracles in our life. In my practice, practicing law over the years, I didn't, it's hard to think about Baba being with me as a lawyer, and especially in the courtroom, but he was. So I'm now, Mary and I moved back to Myrtle Beach from Atlanta, and I have this case that no other lawyer would take. It was this police officer who had been fired because he had been involved in this big drug sting, but he and his partner had gotten carried away, and his partner told my client that he had maybe embellished an affidavit, a search warrant affidavit, that he shouldn't have embellished as much as he did. My client thought that his partner was going to take care of it before it actually got much further, and it didn't happen that way. And my client felt that his partner had lied on the stand, and he just couldn't live with that. That's just one thing you don't do, lie on the stand. And so he went to the chief, and they went to the solicitor, and they had to dismiss these charges against the drug runners who they had actually arrested. And it made the news. It was a huge thing. And my client actually got indicted for that. And they tried him on false swearing charges. I didn't represent him for that. But he was told that if the charges against him were dismissed or he was acquitted, that they would give him his job back as a police officer. And that's for him, that was his true calling in life, to be a police officer. And so when he was acquitted, he went to get his job back, and they didn't give him his job back. And so that's when I got involved. I said that they really had a responsibility to at least give him a hearing, to let him clear his name, and they never gave him that hearing. And based on that, we filed a lawsuit, and now we're trying it. It didn't settle. We're trying it in federal court. And on behalf of my client, I had sued the Horry County Police Commission, Horry County Council, our solicitor, Jim Dunn. All these were defendants, and so now we're trying the case in federal court. And suddenly the press gets wind of what's going on, and so they start covering the story, because here's the last Boy Scout suing the powers of Horry County, and so they were very interested in that. And just sort of as an aside, the trial lasted a week, and the reports were being published. You know, the Sun News was running a story every day about this lawsuit. And Kitty I heard, got fascinated by it. And so every morning she was the first one up, getting the Sun News to read the article about what happened in this case. But on the last day, the jury is now out. They're deliberating, is what's going to happen to my client. And for a lawyer, that's the hardest part of the trial, because it's all over with. It's totally out of your hands. You've either won or lost. You don't know. So I'm in the courtroom by myself, just waiting for the jury to come back, and one of the defendants came in. And so it was just him and me, and he was the only black commissioner on the police commission. And, I don't want to talk, I'm not allowed to really talk to defendants, outside of the presence of their own lawyer, but he wanted to talk, and he came up and he started talking to me. And he said, we're very grateful to her. And I looked at him and I said, excuse me? And he said, we're very grateful to Mrs. Chapin. And I said, I knew Elizabeth Patterson, but she was Chapin. To him, she was Miss Chapin. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, well, our church needed money. We needed to build a new church, and we didn't have the money. And we approached Mrs. Chapin, and she made it possible for us to get this money for this church. And he said, we'll always be grateful to her. And I'm thinking, why is he telling me this? Baba, why are you telling me this? And what happened is they were talking in the back, all the defendants, and they were saying, who's this upstart lawyer who would even bring this lawsuit against us? And so they said, well, it's John Leiter. He's new to the area, but he's a Baba lover. He's up with the Mayor Spiritual Center, and as you know, that's run by Elizabeth Chapin Patterson. And more importantly, it was Baba telling me, I am everywhere, and I take care of everybody. And Elizabeth was his true and faithful servant to make sure that happened. So this black church, this black man, knew me because of Mrs. Patterson, and he wanted me to know how grateful they were, even though I was suing him. That was the beauty of that one.
Did you win?
Yes, we did. Well, we did and we didn't. So we did win in front of the jury. They did come back with a good verdict in favor of the client. On appeal, they decided, the appellate court decided to change the verdict. So, but it was just that moment in the courtroom with this elderly gentleman was a win for me. So.
Did he ever get his job back?
No, it was sad. That's sad. So I actually want to, these are supposed to be my stories, but I want to steal one. Mary will have to help me with this. How many of you knew Dinah Harmon? She just recently died. But so Dinah has been had suffered from cancer for a number of years, and she was a nurse. So here she's trained all these people to help people, and now she needs help. And for Dinah, who was maybe almost as independent as my mother, accepting help wasn't the easiest thing for her. And so she lived in Atlanta, and she now has to go into the hospital for surgery. And she really is there by herself, and she's doing her best. And I think it's when she came out of surgery, the doctor is standing there. She opens her eyes, and he says, "Jai Baba." It turned out that the doctor was from Myrtle Beach, one of my son's best friend, and he was now practicing in Atlanta, and he saw Dinah. Dinah was wearing a little Baba ring, and he saw it, and he knew who Baba was. And so she comes out of surgery, and he says, "Jai Baba." I mean, if that's not Baba taking care of us. So I want to tell this. Let's see if I have any others here. Oh, I have to tell this story. So now we're living in Myrtle Beach. I joined the Rotary Club, in part because Marigee was such a big Rotarian. I love Marigee. And so I had the opportunity to join, and I'm now a member. And they asked me at some point to talk about Baba and the Center. And I go, "Oh, that's sweet. I'd love to do that." But it occurs to me, well, I should tell Jane that I'm going to give this talk about Baba and the Center to the Rotary Club. But then I go, no, if I tell her, she's going to get all anxious about it, and then I'll get anxious about it. And it'd be easier. She'll never know. I'll just give the talk. Yeah. But I'm thinking about it. It occurs to me, I should tell Jane. No, just leave it alone. So it's now the day of the talk. And so I'm walking, and the talk is where the Rotary Club always meets. I mean, there's nothing unusual about that. But if you remember Jane's big black car, she had this big black sedan. Well, it was sitting right there in front of the club. I said, that can't be. That simply can't be. But it is. I go in, and Jane is just coming in. She was taking art lessons from Alec Powers, if any of you know him, a local artist. And they met there before the Rotary Club. I mean, they were meeting there that day before the Rotary Club meeting. And she's walking out just as I'm walking in. And she greets me, and it's a typical sweet, all love greeting. And I say, "Jane, I have something I have to tell you." And she says, "What?" I said, "I'm about to give a talk about Baba and the Center." And I said, "I was thinking about telling you." And she said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll just leave. I'll make you nervous if I stay." And I said, "No, Jane, I want you to stay." Mm-hmm. And so she stayed as my guest during the talk, and she smiled, so I know I didn't do too badly. But that was Baba, sort of the opposite end, letting me know he's with us no matter what we do or don't do. He's not going to let us get away with it.
Wow.
So
Well, did she ever mention it after it was over?
She was very sweet to me, but yeah, she stayed, and she said I did a good job, and she was happy with how it went. And one of the Rotarians asked the question you might expect. Well, are you saying he's Christ? And years ago, the only other talk, or another talk I'd given about Baba was to a high school class, and Elizabeth was still alive. So I did go talk to Elizabeth, because that was her domain. Anything that happens in Myrtle Beach, you better clear through Elizabeth first. And she said, don't worry, don't say anything. And you'll do fine, just don't say Baba's God in human form. That was her concern. She thought that Myrtle Beach was not quite ready to hear that yet. So I had to dance around that when this Rotarian asked me that question.
How did you answer it?
I don't remember. To this day, I don't know how I answered it. But I did not see Jane flinch. That was the only test I had.
Question. How do you deal with something like that?
You might have said what Elizabeth told people. She said this to the parents of the children who were the Baba people, the children being the Baba people. The parents didn't know about Meher Baba so much. So they asked about Meher Baba, and then she answered, Meher Baba lived a Christ-like life.
Oh, what a
You might have
wonderful.
answered that.
I wish I had known that. I would have said that.
I've heard that she said Baba had all of the Christ qualities.
Oh, I like that. Dixon.
Yeah.
Henry Kashadi used to go to New York City every now and then because he was working on incorporating Meher Baba House.
Right.
And so every time he would go, Adele would line up these places for him to talk. And so she lined up the Joe Pine show. And Joe Pine was like an attack dog.
Right.
I mean, there was some, Darwin went with him, and so they were sitting there, and Henry's getting really nervous because the people in front of Joe Pine just ate him up, So anyway, he's sitting there, his turn comes, and he gets up there in the chair and everything, and the usual pleasantries, oh, I'm so-and-so, and so-and-so. So, you say Meher Baba's God. And Henry says, no. Meher Baba says he is, and I believe him.
Oh,
That was Erich's response.
And
that worked.
that was it. The God, Joe Pine backed off, and Henry gave his talk, and
Oh, that's sweet.
yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I mentioned in the beginning when I was telling the story about my mother that she actually gave me my best story. I mean, like this. So my mother was very, she loved Baba people. And she came to the center several times, and she would never quite say that she was a Baba lover. But she was, and but she was. If she were here, she had a deep German accent. She came over in 1939. And when she'd called the office, my receptionist would say, "There's a man on the phone claiming to be your mother." So that's the kind of voice she had. But she was fascinated with spiritual things, or as she understood them, and even India. She claimed she had a Indian boyfriend in her past. So when I told her I was going to India, she was not surprised or at all about that. So she was here at the center, and I had to have been with her. She wouldn't have, I don't think, come by herself, but it's possible. But I wasn't with her the day that she met Kitty. So she goes in and she talks to Kitty. And so she obviously hears Kitty's accent. So my mother says, "Where are you from?" And Kitty says, "England." And my mother says, "Well, what part of England?" And Kitty, of course, says London, and then my mother said, what part of London? And Kitty said Kensington. And so my mother said, what road in Kensington? And Kitty, of course, says Russell Road. And my mother says, what address on Russell Road? And so Kitty said, I think it's 10, what was 10 or 12 Russell Road? And my mother explains that she was on Russell Road. She's now telling Kitty, she was on Russell Road in 1931 during the Round Table Conference. And she was at 22 Russell Road, I think. I found a letter after she died from the people that sponsored her, again Rotarians. They brought her in to help as an interpreter for some of the events because she knew German, French, and English. And I found this letter, and it tore off, but this is on the envelope of the person. Oh, and this is 10 Russell Road. 10. So she was so Kitty must have been 22 then.
Or 12, something.
I didn't think it was that close that they were that. But so my mother was on Russell Road at the same time Baba was. So some years afterward, I'm sitting with my mother, and she says, I've had this, it's come back to me now, that I remember seeing this Eastern man walking up and down the street, flanked by 2 Western women. Do you think that could have been Baba?
Oh, yes.
So, this is Baba. So, I want to read what, because this is our sugar, and Adi Sr. actually said that Baba gives sugar, but in a slightly different way, or Adi's context is a little bit different. Adi was being asked or said something because he came with Baba in 1932 to England, and he saw how Baba treated the Western lovers at that time, and how sweet and accepting Baba was during that time. And this is what Adi said about the difference between Baba's indulgent treatment of the Westerners in the early years versus how he behaved with the Mandali. Adi Sr. once commented, "We were amazed at the restraint with which Baba related to the Westerners. Baba was particularly gentle. All the kicks were received by the Mandali, and all the kisses were received by the Westerners." And so what I've learned is that Baba still gives us the kisses along with the kicks. So I'm hoping that maybe that I wasn't keeping track of time, but if other people would share some of their miracle Baba kisses.
It's about you, John.
I know. Well, what I know, I mean, if people were to ask me, how do I know Baba's God? It wouldn't be because of God Speaks or the discourses. It would be because of all these little things that Baba does that only we can understand. I mean, this is Baba's gift to me to have these little examples of him in my life. And only God can do that. I mean,
What
this
about
isn't...
the hot dog in Charles?
Oh,
Because that's,
Oh, yeah.
you want me to tell that
That's a
story?
good story.
Well, this is how I came to Baba. So, I told you early on that I heard about Baba in 1969. And I heard about Baba from Charles. And
you were at your,
I was at an orientation for incoming freshmen at Emory. And Charles was a rising junior at that time. And he was also a student leader or a guide for that weekend with all these incoming freshmen. So we had, I'd met him on a Friday when I was walking through the dormitory lobby to get up to the dance that they were sponsoring, because I knew that the real purpose of college is to meet girls. I mean, that's why we go to college. And so I was walking through the lobby to go up to where the dance was taking place, and my roommate for that weekend, a boy from Ohio, who I barely just met, came over and he literally took me by the arm, and he is pulling me to where these other students are talking in the dormitory, and he said, they're talking about some mayor or something, and you'd be interested in that. And I'm thinking, a mayor of a city? Why do I want to listen about a mayor of a city? I want to go where the girls are. And he pulls me over, and there's these 4 students sitting around, and I had just read, before that year, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. So I thought I knew everything there was to know about Eastern thought, just because I'd read this one book by Hermann Hesse. But they were talking about planes of consciousness and the lamp. I didn't understand, but what I did understand is I could tell 3 of those kids who were incoming freshmen like me were just, exercising their brainiac muscles, or so they thought. But this one kid who looked younger than me, and I was somewhat offended that someone younger than me would be talking about God. Actually, I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I could tell he was sincere. And, I grew up Jewish, but I was the only Jew in my neighborhood, or even not the city, but close to it in Marietta. So I went to church with all my Christian friends. But finding sincerity either in the Jewish synagogue or in the Christian churches was not an easy thing to do. I can't say I'd run across it that much. But here's this young kid talking about something I didn't understand, but he was awfully sincere. I picked up on that. Well, this young kid turned out to be Charles, and so we finish up, and he hands me a universal message with Baba's picture, and he says, if you're ever in Myrtle Beach, go by the center. And I said I would. Well, the next day we're doing they're having a picnic down on the president's estate, which at Emory is very beautiful. It's this pastoral scene, sort of a British Tudor home on this hill that feeds down in sort of like these English hillside into this lake. And it was a fairly small group, so I saw Charles and we connected, and we're walking down to this picnic together. And so I asked him something else about Baba, and he's telling me, and along the way he said, and Baba said having a sense of humor was a very important part of the spiritual path. And I thought at that moment that was the most radical thought I'd ever heard in my life. No rabbi, no Christian minister had ever said God had a sense of humor and that it's important for the spiritual path. I mean, this was the first time I'd ever had anyone had said this concept. I thought the ground was going to open up and swallow me. It was such a magnificent thought. Well, now we're down there, and we're at where the hot dogs are being served, and we're sitting, all the students are sitting alongside the bank near the lake, and in the distance were the ducks and the geese in the lake, and I mean there were about 30 or 40 of them. And we're talking, and out of the corner of my eye I'm watching them, and the ducks and geese sort of come closer to the shore, and I thought that's interesting. Then they walk up, they come out of the lake and they waddle up, and they're in a straight line. I mean, I thought that's very interesting. I've never seen that before. And we're sitting on the bank, all the students, and we have our hot dogs and hamburgers. And suddenly, as if on cue, the ducks and the geese take flight, and they fly right into us. And Charles has a hot dog in his hand, and he's about to take a bite of it. And suddenly everything went into slow motion for me. The hot dog is going into Charles's mouth. A duck lands in Charles's lap. And I see the beak of the duck go into Charles's mouth and swallow the hot dog. I mean, I'm watching this, and not 15 minutes before, Charles is telling me that Baba said having a sense of humor was one of the most important things of the spiritual path. Well, at that moment, I knew, I mean, I wouldn't have admitted it, but I knew that Baba was the real thing. Nothing like that could ever happen without that being Baba. So a duck brought me to Baba. If I can say Charles did, but it was a duck.
Wasn't it a paradox?
It was a large paradox. And
So what was Charles' reaction?
well, I mean, we were, the ducks were all over us at that point. I'm not sure he even remembers it the same way I do, because it was just suddenly there were ducks flying around and one landed into him. But I mean, he was shocked when it happened, but
Did he say anything?
not that I remember. I mean, well, at that moment we were all in fear of the ducks. I mean, none of us had ever been attacked by a duck.
I'm wondering if this is a repeat. His tongue was tied to the hot dog of them.
That's right. We can go back to Emory and try. We can relive this. Well, those are my stories.
Jay Baba.
Hey, Bob, thank you, John. Well, I just wanted to say, we read a story a while back called The Spiritual Connections, which I won't go into, but your spiritual connection is with that duck. And that is
How many lifetimes do we have to go through for me to be able to pay him back? I'm here forever now, obviously.
Maybe not, though, because this duck has all these Baba connections, so you and Charles, and so maybe the duck got a push and it's now.
That's a great idea. I love that theory.
Yeah. So maybe you don't have to come back a lot of times. Maybe
Just to
yeah, you may have already helped the duck out, you didn't realize it.
I like that. I never thought of that. Thank you.
So, John, we thank you.
Well, thank you.
And Jay Bob.
But she was driving me we were going to a race path event once, and it was only me and her. She was driving her station wagon. And I had just read recently in the discourses when Baba was here in 1956. He was at the lake cabin with Kitty and I forgot who else. And he gives a description of what the center was to be. A place for the spiritually advanced. I forgot the four things, much like Bangalore, those things, and he said that about the center, and I was interested in that, curious about it, so I asked Elizabeth about that, and we're driving to the center, to the race path, and she pulls the car over, stops the car, looks at me and says, Baba never told me that. And so I found that interesting, how you have Kitty's recital of what Baba said, and Elizabeth wasn't saying that wasn't true, but she just said Baba never told me that, so she wasn't bound by that sense that this is what she needed to do for the center. Not that it won't happen, but that just wasn't her charge. And I thought, this is how the Mandali have to work together. This is incredible. So that was my one story with her. Other than when she asked me, when I told her I was going to law school, she said, why waste your time? I maybe should have listened to that one a little bit. But I don't think she wanted to see me leave the work I was doing. She wanted me to stay doing that. Mary, what's your?
That other thing when you finished law school and you had 3 job offers, and what Elizabeth said.
Oh, what'd she say?
Mary, what'd she say?
Do you remember two of them with legal aid and one with Joe Harmon?
Yeah,
Remember?
well, I just, no, I don't.
She said that he had two legal aid opportunities, one with Don Stevens, one in Conway, and this
Bill
job.
Stevens.
Bill Stevens.
I wish Don Stevens.
Oh,
Bill
yeah.
Stevens, remember? And
Yeah.
then one with Joe Harmon, and she said, if you wanna become a good lawyer, to really serve the poor, or serve people, go where you could become, what was it? You remember.
The best lawyer.
First, and then you can do the service. And wherever you go wherever you go, Mary's education is just as important as yours.